Hello, lovely people, and today we are going to talk about how to teach new players. Now, new players occur all the time in D&D. You could have a group of new players, or you could have a new player that's brought in with other veterans. I mean, it's a good thing to have new players coming into D&D, since that shows that the hobby is growing and you'll always be able to actually play with people. So new players are very important and you have to deal with them properly. There are many times when new players have tried D&D and they just say, D&D wasn't for me. And it's because of the DM or some other jerk players why they said that. D&D is usually, at least most of the time, for those people who said it wasn't for them. But why did they say that? Why did they say, D&D just isn't for me? Most of the time, it's because they had a terrible group. And they were not taught how to play the game, they were ignored, or they just had a bad experience. And it's up to you to try to make sure that these players do not have that terrible experience. But what do you do? Well, there are a few things to keep in mind. When you are teaching new players how to play the game, you need to make sure that they are not overwhelmed. It's very easy to say that, hey, you're a new player. And they ask, oh, cool, what can I do in D&D? And you say, well, you can do anything you want. And they say, oh, okay, what does that actually mean? And you as a DM say, well, you can actually do anything you want. Or as a player, you can even say that. And that option is a bit overwhelming. Imagine if you were thrown into a video game and there was no tutorial. It just said, do well. Or let's say you were placed in a first-person shooter and its tutorial message was, go kill him. Like, oh, okay, how do I do that? You need to learn incrementally little bits at first. You need to learn how to move, you need to learn how to use your weapons, etc. That all happens in a video game step by step. The same thing happens with D&D. Now this all starts with players making their character. For a new player, you can go with the idea that they need to make their own character and they need to experience the whole setup, and there is an argument to be made there. The argument is that the player needs to actually know what they're doing instead of given a character sheet and they just don't know anything because they didn't have to work for it. You can see that argument, but there's a problem with it. You all know what's on a character sheet. You all know that it's a lot to take in, and after the player has learned 3 or 4 things, they're expected to learn 3 or 4 more things, and then they're expected to make decisions on what items to get, and then they're expected to make decisions on kind of what their class specialization will be in the future, which they have no idea about. So it's a lot of overwhelming just stuff thrown at them, and they're not able to learn it incrementally. That is why I suggest that you give new players an option to just pick a pre-made character. Now, this will make it so that the new player doesn't know everything as easily, and they can fall into a trap. The most common trap is that the new player would never actually learn their character sheet and they would never learn the game. This is a fear for most DMs and players out there. You don't want to have that player there who's played the game for 8 levels and is asking what do they add to attack. That's not good at all. So when making character sheets, it usually eliminates that confusion, but not always. We need to figure out how to make that not occur, because it can occur even when the new player makes their character on a character sheet. When we introduce things to the players, we need to introduce it incrementally. If you're the DM, when giving them their character sheet, you just ask them a few questions. What do you want to do? Do you want to be more of a ranged person? Okay, you want to be more ranged instead of melee. Do you want to be more magic? Okay, do you want to be more support? All right, there you go. Here's a character. And have them start with that. Be open to the option of them changing characters once they learn a little bit more about the game, but we don't want to overwhelm them too much. Now, once they have their character sheet, we will ask them certain questions that are relevant to the situation. For example, they're in a town. Instead of asking, what do you do in the town, which is what we might actually ask veteran players, since of course they're in D&D, they can actually go around and lead the story. These new players don't really know the options. So you could say that you are in a bar. You see that there's a shady man in the corner, there's a bartender who serves drinks, and you are with your party. There's also a song going on in the corner. Would you like to interact with anyone else aside from your party? Or what do you want to do? And what do you want to do is a great line, but it needs to have some context for new players. They need to have some guidance. Just asking, what do you want to do in a bar is a little bit much. For new players, they could say, well, I want to gamble. And then you can, as a DM, go off that and just say, oh yeah, of course there's people gambling in the corner. Why wouldn't there be? It's a bar. And then you just have those people there. For new players, it's a little bit more, they need more direction. And you want to give them a little bit of direction to start. This occurs in combat and everything else. You tell them about their options. Say that you have a main action, movement, and bonus action. You can do them in any order, but you can move a certain amount, however many feet, do your main action, which can be like an attack or cast a spell, and if something says a bonus action, you could do that. Otherwise, forget about it. Now, as we slowly give them the basics of D&D, we also don't want to try to force our way of thinking onto new players. New players are very interesting and can come up with a lot of crazy ideas that veteran players wouldn't really think of, which is why new players are awesome to DM. For example, they could, in a bar, decide that, hey, is there a clown? And you might wonder, why is there a clown in the bar? And you could say that there is and wonder where they're going, or you could say no, and the new player wants to be a clown. And then they start going into this weird storyline, which you would never have thought of, and I can't even comprehend at this point. And that makes interesting storylines. So we don't want to force them into this pigeonhole of ideas of what we are used to. We want to let them be able to flourish and play the game in their own way. And to do that, we need to not overwhelm them and get them to a point of competence. Now, once they learn that, oh, there's options in a bar, they go to another bar and they decide that they want to do something else. You don't try to give them as many options. You can say there are people in the corner, there's people singing over here, and there's a bartender. Note how I didn't ask, do you want to interact or what do you want to do? I'm just laying out the situation a little bit more. I'm slowly taking away the steps of guidance and trying to get those players to do what they want. And the only time that you want to really criticize a new player or impact their decision is when they're doing something pretty bad. And that could be for breaking rules, or it could also be when they're not understanding rules, or when they're just doing something that is not very good. Like, for example, they say as a level 1 wizard that I'm going to go up to the biggest, beefiest guy and I'm just going to punch him. Okay, you can start a bar fight, that's fine. And then they state, I'm going to take out my dagger and start stabbing people. Well, let's roll that back a little bit. Maybe you don't understand the consequences of your actions and kind of go into explaining it. New players might not understand that actions have consequences. It's a common thing. So whenever they do anything which would negatively impact them or the group to a great degree, just make sure to clarify what they're doing and clarify that this can have a negative impact. Again, you may not want to say that you shouldn't do this, unless of course it's randomly stabbing people, but you want to make sure that they understand that their actions will have a negative consequence, instead of just finding out later on, hey, I'm in jail and I can't play the game or something because of whatever I did and I had no idea it was a problem. You want to make sure that the players understand that wanton killing or just bad ideas are bad ideas. Now, aside from just warning players on bad ideas, we still want to get them to do things. If you remember in the beginning of the video, we talked about the problem of having a new player be 8 levels in and still ask, what do I have to hit? Which is a terrible idea. So you need to have them slowly do things. And for example, when attacking, you would ask, once they understand that they have a main action, a bonus action, and a movement, and they say they want to attack, you can ask, well, what do you add to that? And you're getting them to do it instead of just coddling them. See, this is where a lot of DMs and players encounter an issue. They don't want to overwhelm the new players, and thus they don't give them the option to do anything on their own. They say, well, this is what you roll. Roll a d20. All right, so you roll a 15, which means he got a 22. That is a bad way of doing it. That will encourage the players to never understand the rules or understand the game or figure out their own attack bonuses or saves, skills, anything else. It just makes it so that the player says, oh, okay, I just need to roll the die, and then they'll say what happens. You don't want that to happen. You want to make sure that your new players are actively doing things little by little. This also applies to roleplay. New players are, understandably, a bit shy when it comes to role-playing in the beginning. If they are in a market, you might have the veteran players go out and say, we're going to find and search this person, and then they start talking to people randomly, and the new player just kind of sits back. Of course they're going to sit back. They're unsure of what's happening. So you just have small interactions. Have maybe a child come and say hello to them. Have them do a little bit of interactions here and there. Non-consequential, of course, but try to get them to do things little by little so that they build up that confidence and competency in the game. Again, we're not trying to force them to do anything. We're just making sure that they do little by little. Not overwhelming, just one small thing at a time. And eventually, your new players will grow to like the game, feel like they actually have a voice in the game, and are an important part of the group instead of just someone who's there and is told what to do and it's kind of boring. Which happens for many new players, unfortunately. And we don't want that to happen to our new players. We want them to be happy with the game. We want them to have a good experience because D&D really is for pretty much everyone. So I hope that has helped you understand how to deal with new players in D&D. I know that new players can be hard to deal with. At times it's teaching someone something that you already know innately, and it can be a little frustrating, but you need to think of it from their perspective. We were all new at one point, and we all had a good experience at one point in order to actually continue playing this wonderful hobby. So let's try to provide a good experience for them. Let's try to make sure that they are a valued part of the group. They're not overwhelmed, and slowly learn the game little by little until they start doing things and gain more and more competency to be their own unique player. With this, I hope that your new players come to enjoy the game and come to be a great and valued part of your group. This has been Wizzo, and keep rolling.